It was Saturday night, the night after Aliya's grand plan to get her rightful place as the most popular person at Freedom Miller High. Ralph had taken time out of his Saturday trying to get Jessie and Rico together, which didn't entirely work. Jessie and Rico got into an argument over a girl whom they had both dated. That girl being Aliya. Ralph had succeeded in getting Jessie and Rico to meet with Gus and Ralph once more, but the two former friends refused to speak to one another. Meanwhile, Gus had been at home, finally enjoying a break from the traumatic experiences. For once, at a dinner between Gus and his two parents, Gus talked to his parents about the upcoming night. "Can I go meet my old friends from middle school at McDonald's tonight?" Gus asked. "Yes," Gus's mother replied. "Also remember that your father and I's 21st anniversary is Monday night." Gus nodded, now looking forward to the group's reunification in a few hours. Gus devoured his food and texted Ralph, letting him know that he'd be at McDonald's at 9 p.m. Gus entered the fast food store, where he saw Ralph and Rico sitting at a table, waiting for their food. "Hey, Gus, it's been a long time," Rico exclaimed. "Hey guys, where's Jessie?" Gus asked. "We don't know, but he better arrive," Ralph replied. "You can go order something. Rico and I are just waiting for our food right now." Gus went to stand in line as Jessie entered the restaurant. He waved at Ralph and gave Rico a cold stare, and went over to Gus to order food with him. "Hey, Gus, how have you been?" Jessie asked. "I've been great," Gus lied. "How are you?" "You know, just beasting my way through 9th grade. Just like I did in middle school," Jessie laughed. "Remember when Mrs. Johnson announced my grade in front of the whole class?" Gus laughed. "And then Aliya figured out you'd been lying to her about your grade, and she almost dumped you." "Yeah, well, she cheated on me with Rico anyway." The two ordered, sat down with Ralph and Rico, and they were all eating their food in no time. It was mostly Ralph and Gus talking, as Ralph and Jessie sat awkwardly across from each other. Despite this, Ralph and Gus made their best attempts to include the two in the conversation. "Just like the time you two worked together on a class presentation and got an A," Gus said to Rico and Jessie. "MMPH," Rico mumbled. After a long pause, Ralph decided to take direct action. "The thing with Aliya was a year ago, can you two just get over it?" Rico and Jessie pondered this for a moment, but said nothing. "Girls should never get in the way of two good friends, especially you two," Gus began. "You two were always inseparable. The best of friends. There was no Rico without Jessie, and no Jessie without Rico." Everyone went quiet for a moment, until Jessie said, "It's not that deep, man." Rico tried to suppress a chuckle, but it eventually came out, and eventually everyone was laughing. By the end of the night, the four were now friends, and not even the most horrific and tragic event could break them apart. It was Monday, and Gus Blue had returned to a slightly different Freedom Miller High School. That difference being the change in the popularity hierarchy at school. Over the weekend, Aliya had worked to spread her influence, and had worked to make sure that everybody knew that Tony, Richard, Jacob, and Shannon were worth nothing after the events of Friday night. Aliya didn't spend a second of her weekend at the DuPont mansion, but instead spent it partying, hanging out with every popular kid at school, and destroying the reputations of the former popular kids. While Tony, Richard, and Jacob were too stupid to figure out what had happened, Shannon Porter was immediately suspicious. Not because of her intelligence, but because of her incredibly fragile ego. The second she walked out of the dance, humiliated, she thought to herself, how could this happen to me? How could everything I've worked towards for years just crumble in minutes? She felt slightly off that night, like she'd been drugged, but it wasn't too serious. She went to her father, Sheriff Adam Porter, to get a drug test. The drug test came back positive. And although her father wanted to get the school in trouble, Shannon profusely swore to her father that she could deal with it on her own. Unfortunately for Shannon, she could not pin the injustice done to her reputation on anyone, except for Aaliyah Marie DuPont. Shannon had gotten a few people on her side, and the truth was spreading throughout the school, but word had gotten around to Aaliyah, who had devised a more ruthless plan to solidify her reputation. Gus, despite Mr. Dominus's firm grip on his life, felt the best he'd felt in a while. He had his friends back. Aaliyah was happy, and he had not been kidnapped in a few days. All was well, until Aaliyah tracked Gus down at his locker and tried to make use of her beauty and charming personality to persuade him. "Hey Gus, how's it going?" Aaliyah asked. Gus was starting to get worried. "I'm fine. I need a favor from you," she said. "I need you to kill Shannon Porter." "What the F?" Gus shouted before Aaliyah put her hand over his mouth. People in the hallways were staring at Gus, while being very confused as to why the most popular girl was talking to one of the most infamous people in the school. "Shush. Don't freak out. Just do it. I don't care how. Just make it happen by the end of Tuesday." Aaliyah began to walk away, but Gus had one more comment. "Or what?" Aaliyah paused to think, before saying, "Mr. Dominus thinks the orphanage is a nice place." She walked away, and Gus received a chill down his spine. He reluctantly headed to class, now confused and hurt by what had just happened. Gus walked by the elevator leading down to the lab, and he had a hunch that Toby was down there, working. Again. The anarchists were after Toby. He'd been hiding in the lab for days, no food, and only drinking the pleasurable water from the buckets of water he was meant to study and experiment on. Just after his fight with Bloodshot, Toby sprinted out of Freedom Miller High to try and find Gus. But while trying to get into his car, he was shot at by a group of men wearing ski masks with the Anarchist A painted onto their hoodies. Toby narrowly escaped and returned to the school, hiding in the lab for days, with no phone, and no safe way out. He was waiting for any sign that it was Monday, a sign that school was ongoing, so he could leave without being gunned down. Toby theorized that the anarchists had become aware of Mayor Barrington's plans to experiment on the water, and had known that Toby was the scientist, and were therefore going after him. Toby had retrieved an emergency gun from a safe in the lab, but the foolish former Mayor Thomas Clark didn't leave him any bullets, so it was nothing more than a dull blade he could hit somebody with. At 2:56 p.m., Toby decided to take a chance. He was hungry, paranoid, and deprived of the outside light. He put his gun in his pocket and took the elevator upstairs, where he found that everyone was in their classes, and it was indeed Monday. He now had one priority: save Gus Blue from captivity. He felt very selfish for hiding underground for days while fully knowing that Gus was being held captive. Toby's Tesla was gone, presumably towed away. He'd have to deal with that later. First, he made the horrifying walk to his own house, where he certainly didn't feel safe. Just how much did the anarchists know about Toby? At his house, Toby loaded his gun and ate nothing. He was running on pure adrenaline. He sprinted to the Communist Club where he had first seen VB give a horrifying speech to a horde of communists. The words, "Join the revolution. Destroy the bourgeoisie. Follow VB," were put on a wall next to the door to enter the club. Toby drew his gun and went inside. There were about a dozen people sitting and drinking alcohol. Toby surveyed the room and aimed the gun at the communists and angrily screamed, "Where's Mr. Dominus?" VB's personal assistant, Sylvester, rose from a chair. Toby recognized him from before, and thus fixed his gun on him. "Let's take this outside," Sylvester said shakily. Toby and Sylvester exited the club and ended up outside. "Where's Gus Blue?" Toby demanded. "A few of our men took him to a personal meeting a few days ago, and we then returned him to his home," Sylvester replied. "What is his address?" Toby asked, a little calmer. "Now, wait out here. I'll be back," Sylvester said as he went back into the club. As Toby waited, he became much calmer, and the adrenaline he was running off of a few minutes ago was mostly gone. He began to feel hungry and tired, so he'd have to go stay somewhere, but assuming the anarchists knew where he lived, Toby's apartment was an unsafe option. Sylvester returned with a file in his hand. "Gus Blue's address is 939 Mahogany Street, which is just over by. You have a goddamn file on a 15-year-old kid. You people are sick," Toby shouted. Toby raised his gun at Sylvester, and forced the file from the man's hands. Toby walked through the city with a file in hand, and a gun in his pocket, until he reached 939 Mahogany Street. Gus's house was just as he imagined it to be, incredibly mediocre. Toby knocked on the door, and Gus opened it. Toby was very relieved to see Gus once again, after helplessly worrying about him for days. "Gus, can I please stay at your house just for one night?" Toby asked. "My parents are going on their anniversary date tonight, so yes, but why?" Gus asked. "These anarchists." Toby looked around, surveying the area for anarchists. "They're trying to kill me, and I just need to stay here so I can think of a plan. I'll be gone tomorrow, I swear." Gus let Toby inside, and Toby was treated to some plentiful instant ramen and chocolate Pop-Tarts. They talked about recent events, including Gus's task to kill Shannon Porter. "God, she's worse than Dominus," Toby said sorrowfully. "Is there any way out of this?" Gus asked. Toby thought and thought, but only one solution came to him. "I could do it for you." "That's insane. Shannon Porter did nothing wrong," Gus argued. "Clearly, morals aren't relevant in this world anymore. People like you and I were made to follow others' orders, right up until the day we die. We just have to survive this cruel game for as long as possible. So I'm going to shoot Shannon Porter tomorrow, because somebody has to do it." "What if we kill Aaliyah?" Gus asked. "Yeah, we just somehow managed to kill one of the richest people in Benco Falls. Sounds great." Toby and Gus argued, ate, and planned until 10 p.m., when Veronica and John Blue began to drive back home. Toby heard the sound of rainfall just outside Gus's house. "I think it's raining," Toby commented. MMPH. Gus replied. With a nod. The rainfall sounded odd, and very inconsistent, so Toby checked outside the window. And there was no rain. Huh, it's not raining. This continued for a little longer, and then stopped. Toby and Gus could hear the sound of Gus's parents arriving. I should get going. I'm going to tell Barrington about the anarchists tomorrow, and then I'll kill Shannon on her way to school, Toby declared. Oh my God, Gus complained. If I don't do this, your parents will die. I don't want to do it, but I have to. Suddenly, the two heard a click, click, and then the sound of an object rolling on the floor. The two barely had any time to realize what was going on, until the walls around him erupted into a great blazing fire, and an explosion deafened the two and caused the house to collapse. Toby instinctively grabbed his gun and took Gus's hand, guiding him through the debris. The screaming of Gus's parents could be heard from the garage. 4 hooded figures wearing ski masks with the anarchist A on their hoodies were seen running away from the house. Toby shot at one, disabling the man's leg and piercing his chest. My parents! Gus shouted. Gus and Toby stumbled through the ruins, coughing and avoiding the fire. They found Gus's father on fire, and Gus's mother crawling across the floor with her legs cut off. It was a horrific sight, even for Toby, who had never met Gus's parents. Toby managed to cover Gus's eyes, but it was too late. Gus saw the deaths of his parents, and it would change him forever.